My name is Mara Delaney, 37 years old. My mother's 70th birthday was supposed to be a celebration, the kind of milestone gathering people post about with long captions and heart emojis. Instead, from the moment Jamie and I stepped through their front door, I felt it, that strange shift in energy, like we were background noise in our own family's movie. They were all already there, my sister Trish, her husband, their kids, my parents, everyone smiling a little too wide, drinking a little too fast, talking a little too loud. I knew that kind of energy. It wasn't warmth, it was tension wrapped in party balloons. Jaime walked in, clutching the drawing he'd worked on for days. A forest scene with tiny deer under a sky full of stars. He'd even used glitter, which he normally hated because he said Grandma might like it. The night before, he'd asked me 3 times if I thought she'd hang it on her wall. I told him she should. I didn't tell him I wasn't sure she would even look at it. He held the drawing with both hands, the paper just slightly trembling. "Do you think she'll like it?" he whispered. "I do," I said, and tried to sound more certain than I felt. My mom greeted us at the door with a loud, "There you are," like we were late, even though we were exactly on time. She hugged Jamie quickly, kissed the air near my cheek, then turned back toward the kitchen before her hand fully dropped from my shoulder. "Grandma, I made you something," Jamie said, stepping forward, holding out the drawing like it was a piece of his heart. She barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's nice," she murmured, already looking past him, and set it down on the console table like it was a flyer she'd pick up later, or not at all. No smile, no real look, no thank you, just down. I felt my chest tighten, but I swallowed it. This wasn't new. My mother had always believed that ignoring small hurts was the same thing as peace. Jaime's eyes lingered on the table. "She didn't really look at it," he whispered. "She's just busy saying hi to everyone," I said. "She'll look later." I knew I was lying, and I think he knew it too. The night moved in that weird, too bright way. My dad pouring himself another drink, Trish already holding court at the dining table, laughing loudly at some story where she was the hero. My mother floating from person to person like a hostess in a show she was directing. I kept noticing the drawing just sitting there, alone. Then it happened. Caleb, Trish's 12-year-old, wandered over to the table. He picked up the drawing, looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, and snorted. "What is this supposed to be?" he said. "A forest," Jaime said quietly from beside me, "with stars." Caleb rolled his eyes. "Looks like a baby did it." Before I could move, he crumpled the paper into a tight ball and tossed it straight into the fireplace. The flames took it fast. Glitter flared, then disappeared. "Hey!" Jaime shouted, stepping forward. Then Caleb yelled, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Nobody wants his crappy art anyway." For a split second, there was silence. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something, to correct him, to tell him that was cruel. Instead, my mother laughed first, a sharp, delighted sound. "Oh, Caleb," she said, like he'd just delivered the punchline of the evening. Trish wiped tears from her eyes. "Oh my God, that was brutal," she choked out, laughing even harder. Even my dad chuckled, shaking his head as if boys will be boys. The kids looked around, confused. Then some of them laughed too, because the adults had shown them it was safe, approved, even entertaining. No one said a word to Caleb, not one adult. Jaime just froze. At first, I think he thought it was part of some weird joke. Then he looked at the fireplace, at the ash where his work had been, and then he looked at me. And in that 1 second, I watched the understanding land. His face changed. The confusion drained out and left something else behind. Something smaller. "Mama?" he whispered. I didn't trust my voice. If I opened my mouth, everything would come pouring out. Years of being told I was too sensitive, that I made everything uncomfortable, that I should just let things go. So I didn't say anything. I grabbed our coats from the back of the chair, knelt down, and said softly, "Put on your shoes, Jaime. We're going home." "We're leaving?" he asked, eyes wide. "Yeah," I said, "we're leaving." No dramatic exit, no raised voice, no scene. I didn't even look at the fireplace again. I just guided him to the door while the laughter faded into a confused murmur behind us. "Seriously, Mara?" I heard Trish say quietly. "Over a drawing?" My mother's voice floated after that. "She always does this, always ruins the mood." I pretended not to hear. Jaime heard every word. We stepped out into the cold night. Jamie's hand was small and warm in mine. He didn't speak until we were halfway to the car. "Was it really that bad?" he asked. "My drawing?" I swallowed hard. "No," I said. "Your drawing was beautiful. What they did was wrong." He nodded, but I could see him shrinking into himself, tucking the hurt away, somewhere I couldn't reach with just words. That night, around 9:30, while Jamie was brushing his teeth, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. "You're making things uncomfortable. Just skip Christmas." I stared at it for a second. Uncomfortable. That was always the word, wasn't it? Not cruel, not unkind, just uncomfortable. The problem wasn't what they did. It was that I noticed. I typed back, "So does the funding." My fingers didn't even tremble. I meant it. For the past few years, ever since my business took off and they mentioned they were struggling with holiday costs, I'd been quietly sending my parents $3,000 every December. No announcements, no conditions. Family, I told myself. That's what you do. You help. Funny thing about help. Some people don't see it as kindness. They see it as a given. I logged into the joint account we used and shut it down. Just like that. A line closed. A door, almost. By 1 o'clock a.m., my phone was a war zone. 27 missed calls. Messages from my mom, my sister, my dad. How could you? He's just a kid. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're punishing everyone over nothing. Not one message about Hamey. Not one word about his drawing or his scraped heart. I didn't respond, but they weren't done. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making pancakes, the house quiet except for the sizzle of batter in the pan, when I heard the front door open. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even realized I'd forgotten to lock it. My parents walked in like they still owned the space. Trish came in right behind them, Caleb hovering in the hallway, eyes darting around like he was expecting a show. They didn't come to apologize. They came to argue. My mom started in before I could even pick up a dish towel. "I am so disappointed in you, Mara." My dad crossed his arms. "Money shouldn't come with strings." Trish folded hers. "You're teaching Jamie to be weak. The world isn't going to baby him over every little thing." "I told you to leave last night," I said quietly. "You could have called." "Because you'd answer?" Trish shot back. "You never answer when you're in one of your moods." I heard Jamie's footsteps on the stairs. He paused halfway down, watching. "I want you to leave," I said. "Now." They ignored me. My mother moved closer to the counter, like we were just having coffee. My dad shook his head, looking at me like a problem to solve instead of a daughter. Then Caleb pushed past me, shoulder knocking into my arm, heading straight for Jamie. "Hey, Picasso," he said, smirking. "Got any more masterpieces you want to burn?" Jaime backed up too fast, his sock catching on the edge of the rug. He slipped and went down hard. The sound of his elbow hitting the floor echoed in the kitchen. He gasped, eyes squeezing shut, skin already reddening where it scraped. He tried not to cry. I could see it, his jaw tight, his lips trembling. That was it. I stepped between Jaime and the rest of them. "Get out," I said. "It was an accident," my mother said quickly. "You're overreacting." "He's just playing," Trish added. "You can't wrap that boy in bubble wrap forever." I said get out. This time, they heard something in my voice that they hadn't heard before. Something final. My dad muttered, "Unbelievable," but he moved toward the door. My mom shook her head like this was some dramatic scene I'd staged. Trish rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd fall over. They stepped outside. I shut the door behind them and locked it. Jaime sniffed quietly behind me. "I'm okay," he whispered. I turned, knelt down, and gently took his arm to look at the scrape. "You shouldn't have to be," I said. "I thought it was over when I locked the door. But in my family, being told to leave someone's home after your grandson gets hurt and your daughter says she's done still isn't enough to register as serious." That was just the beginning. The morning after the birthday disaster, I woke with that tight, hollow feeling in my chest, the kind you get when you've already lived through the worst part, but your body hasn't caught up yet. I walked into the kitchen, started making pancakes for Jamie, and tried to pretend the night before hadn't happened. For about 30 seconds, it almost worked. Then I heard the front door open. I hadn't locked it. That small mistake was all the invitation they needed. My parents walked in first, Trish close behind, their faces set like they were the ones coming to clean up my mess. They didn't look worried. They looked offended, inconvenienced, like I had turned a birthday into a crisis, not their laughter at a child's humiliation. They came to argue, not apologize. And they argued well, years of practice. My mom led with disappointment, her favorite currency. My dad followed with logic he wielded like a dull knife. Trish tossed barbs between them with practiced ease, the way some people pass appetizers at a party. But the moment that stuck out more than all of it came hours later, after they finally left my house and slammed the door behind them. A text from my mother. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. We were all just joking. Gloria, don't take everything so personally. Jaime needs to toughen up. Not a word about what Caleb did. Not a word about Jamie slipping and hitting the floor. Not a word about the drawing. Their texts read like a press release. Cold, rehearsed, perfectly structured to shift blame onto the person who dared to notice the wound. By noon, Trish joined in, firing off her own messages. You're being dramatic again. You're going to ruin Christmas over a piece of paper. Mom's heartbroken. Dad's sick over it. And your little art prodigy will live. That last line almost made me throw my phone across the room. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because something inside me had gone still, like a calm before a storm I didn't recognize yet. But the money, they remembered that. Oh, they remembered fast. Around 3 p.m., my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my dad. His voice was tight, controlled, like he was trying not to sound as panicked as he clearly was. He said he'd heard the account was closed and wanted to make sure it wasn't permanent. Said they'd already paid for the Christmas trip. Ski gear wasn't returnable. The resort was charging late fees. The kids were excited. And then came the line that settled deep in my bones. We really counted on you this year. Not, we're sorry. Not, we messed up. Just, we expected you to keep paying, no matter how we treated your son. That evening, they came back again. This time they knocked. They looked older, worn down, like a few hours of missing money had aged them a decade. I opened the door only because Jamie was upstairs, and I didn't want their pounding to wake him. They said they wanted to talk calmly, that things had gotten out of hand, that they believed in putting the past behind us. Then, can you just help us this one last time? There it was, the truth, bare and unpolished. I asked if anyone had talked to Caleb. Had he been told what he did was wrong? Had anyone explained cruelty isn't a joke? They looked at each other. My mom said they didn't want to make a big deal out of it, that Caleb was just being a kid, that they didn't want to make him feel guilty over something silly. I felt something cold settle in me then, something final. I didn't yell, I didn't explain, I just opened the door and said, 5 seconds, please leave. They did. The days leading up to Christmas felt strangely peaceful. The ski trip, apparently, was dead. I found out through Trish's Instagram story, a sad-looking dining room centerpiece with the caption, Plan B Christmas, thanks for nothing. Petty. Predictable. Jaime and I stayed home that week. We baked cookies, cut paper snowflakes, made dough ornaments. No glitter, because glitter reminded him of the drawing. I let him decide everything. The music, the decorations, the pace of our days. It felt like learning how to breathe again. Then on Christmas Eve, my mother called. Her tone was bright, almost cheery, as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't closed doors and accounts and decades of unspoken resentment. They were hosting dinner at home, she said. A small gathering, just family. She said Jamie should come see his cousins open presents. Said maybe it was time to put things in the past. Said she was willing to forgive. Forgive me. I didn't say yes, I said I'd think about it. But Jamie overheard the call. He tugged at my sleeve. He asked if we could go. Maybe they'll be nicer this time, Mama. I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect him. But then he said softly, I miss Grandma. And so, I said yes against my instincts. Christmas Eve smelled like pine and cinnamon when we stepped into their house. The decorations were perfect. The smiles rehearsed. Caleb didn't look up from his phone. Trish waved without warmth. My mom acted like she'd won something. We sat for dinner. The table gleamed with her best china. Jaime pushed food around his plate. Everyone talked like they were auditioning for a commercial about perfect families. Then my dad stood up, glass raised, and spoke about forgiveness, second chances, and sticking together. Everyone nodded. And then Trish leaned across the table, smiling wide. Let's just hope no one throws a tantrum over paper this time. Silence. Then soft laughter. Then louder laughter. My mother laughed. My father smiled. Even Trish's husband chuckled quietly like he wasn't sure, but decided to go along with it. Jaime looked down at his plate, and I felt something inside me finally, completely snap. The moment the laughter broke across the table, soft at first, then swelling like a tide, I stopped hearing anything but the ringing in my ears. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was final. Trish's smile stretched just a little too wide. My mother hid her chuckle behind her napkin. My father shook his head like the joke was harmless, and I was the only one too fragile to take it. And Jamie just stared down at his mashed potatoes, trying to make himself smaller. I didn't make a speech. I didn't yell. I didn't say a single word. I simply stood up, reached for the porcelain plate in front of me, one of my mother's cherished antiques, the ones she polished every Christmas like holy relics, and let it slip from my hand. It hit the hardwood floor with a crack that cut through every whispered judgment in that room. The plate shattered into bright, sharp pieces that scattered under the table and into the corners like tiny truths finally breaking loose. No one moved, no one breathed. I didn't wait for a reaction. I took Jamie's hand and walked out. No goodbye, no coat, no explanation. Just the two of us slipping into the cold night air. Halfway down the walkway, Jamie's voice cracked through the silence. "Mama, are you mad at me?" My chest tightened. "No," I said, squeezing his hand. "I'm proud of you. None of this is your fault." He nodded, but he didn't really look convinced. He leaned into my side as we walked toward the car, and I felt the weight of the evening press down on both of us. His confusion, my anger, their cruelty. At home, I made him hot chocolate. We curled up on the couch under the soft glow of the tree lights. A movie flickered on the screen, but neither of us was really watching. I felt myself drifting somewhere between exhaustion and resolve when a sudden knock at the door jolted me upright. Not a regular knock. Sharp, official. Through the window, the red and blue pulses hit the snow in slow, heavy flashes. A police car. I opened the door just enough to see the officer's face, the cold swirling behind him. He asked if everything was okay. Said they received a call about a family dispute. Said someone reported that I destroyed property in a fit of anger and stormed out of a gathering. I stood there, stunned but not surprised. Not really. That's what they did. Weaponize anything they could to make a point. I told the officer the truth. I broke one plate. My mother's. No one was threatened. No one was harmed. The only real damage done that night was to my son, long before any porcelain hit the floor. The officer shifted awkwardly. He apologized, almost in a whisper, like he knew exactly what kind of family would call the police over a shattered ceramic plate. He left within minutes. But that wasn't what lingered. What lingered was the realization that they hadn't called because they were scared. They weren't afraid of me. They were trying to punish me, control me, reclaim the power I'd taken back. After the lights faded, I locked the door and stood there for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. Jaime had already gone upstairs, curled under his blankets with the little flashlight I'd slipped into his stocking. He didn't ask about the police. He didn't need to. He knew the world of adults could be cruel in quiet, calculated ways. I thought the night was over, but the next morning, on New Year's Day, something waited in my mailbox. A single sheet of lined paper, folded twice, no envelope. My father's handwriting. "I raced you better than this. You've embarrassed this family long enough. You are not welcome in this house until you apologize and make things right." Nothing about Jamie, nothing about the drawing, nothing about Christmas. Just blame. I tossed it in the trash, then took it back out, tore it into pieces, tossed it again. Later that afternoon, Jamie found the torn pieces. He sat on the bottom step of the staircase, the letter reconstructed just enough for him to understand. He didn't look sad. He looked tired. "Mama?" he asked quietly. "So, we're not their family anymore?" I sat down beside him, the air thick with everything I wanted to protect him from. "We're always family to each other," I said. "That's what matters now." That night, without telling him why, I packed a small bag for both of us. We left our phones in a drawer and drove north, into the kind of snow that makes the world feel softer than it is. 2 hours out, we stopped at a cabin I used to escape to before Jamie was born. No TV, no Wi-Fi, just trees and silence and a wood stove that cracked and sighed like it remembered a different lifetime. We stayed 2 nights. The first morning, Jamie stepped onto the porch, looked out at the frozen lake, and whispered, "It feels like a different planet." He sketched for hours. Trees, icicles, the chipped red railing. The quiet gave him room to breathe, to rebuild something inside himself that I hadn't realized was breaking. On the second night, after dinner, he handed me a folded piece of paper. His drawing, me and him sitting near the fire, the blanket draped over the chair, 2 mugs on the sill, a tiny pine tree we found behind the cabin, stuck in a vase. At the bottom, in large block letters, "This is what family feels like." I didn't cry. I just folded it with careful hands, tucked it into my wallet, and held on. Because he was right. And because I finally understood what I'd been fighting for all along. January settled over our house like a soft, heavy blanket. Quiet, calm, and deceptively peaceful. After the cabin, Jamie slipped back into school easily, almost gratefully. He drew more, laughed more, slept through the night without twitching in his dreams. I watched him carefully, waiting for signs that the wounds of December were still buried somewhere beneath the surface, but he seemed lighter than I'd seen him in years. I should have felt the same, but there was something inside me I couldn't shake, a bruise that hadn't fully bloomed, a knot in the chest that refused to loosen. It wasn't longing. I didn't miss my parents. It wasn't doubt. I didn't regret walking away. It was something heavier, more stubborn. It was unfinished business. I found myself replaying the plate shattering, the police at the door, the letter calling me an embarrassment. I didn't want those things defining the ending. Not because I needed them back in my life, God, no, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of what if into the rest of the year. What if I hadn't said everything that needed saying? What if I hadn't asked the one question that mattered most? What if they didn't even understand what they'd done? One quiet Saturday afternoon, while Jamie sat on the living room rug, sketching the cat-shaped mug he'd made in art class, I made a decision I never expected to make again. "We're going for a drive," I told him gently. He looked up, blinking. He didn't ask where. He just packed 3 pencils and his sketchbook, zipped up his coat, and followed me to the car. That was the thing about Hamey. He always understood more than I said out loud. Snow had fallen that morning, not heavy, just enough to soften the neighborhood into pale silver. My parents' driveway was half cleared, like someone had started shoveling but got tired halfway. It felt like a metaphor for the last 30 years. I knocked. My mom opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been standing just on the other side. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked inconvenienced. "Come in," she said, sharp and flat, not even pretending to sound welcoming. We stepped inside. Everything was exactly the same as Christmas Eve. The candles on the mantel, the framed family photo from 3 years ago, the smell of lemon polish and cold air trapped inside heavy walls. My dad was in his recliner with a book open in his lap. He wasn't reading it, not really. He looked up just long enough to register my presence, then looked back down as if I were a neighbor asking to borrow a shovel. Trish wasn't there. For once, that felt like mercy. I stayed standing. Chaimee sat beside me, sketchbook already open on his knees like a shield. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I just need to ask one thing before we leave this behind completely." My mother sighed, dramatically, like the effort of listening was already too much for her. I looked directly at her. "Do you think what happened to Jamie was okay?" For a moment, I thought she might consider the question, but she didn't. "Kids fight," she said, shrugging. "Caleb didn't mean anything by it. You made a scene, Mara. You always do." Then she looked at Jamie, and this part will never stop burning. "We've always loved Jamie. You're the one keeping him away." I felt Jamie go still. I turned to my father. "Do you have anything to say?" He didn't look up from his book. It wasn't that serious. I took a slow breath. This isn't about a drawing, or a plate, or a trip. This is about a pattern, one you've used my whole life. Dismissing, blaming, pretending everything is fine as long as you don't have to change. My mother rolled her eyes so hard her head tilted. "Oh, Mara, you've always been sensitive. You overreact. You always have." There it was. The sentence that defined my childhood, my 20s, every argument, every cut, every silent wound. That was the moment I knew, not hoped, not suspected, but knew that it had never been about Jamie. It was never even about me. It was about the version of me they needed in order to avoid seeing themselves. I stood. "Let's go, Jaime." As we turned toward the door, my father finally spoke. His voice was quiet, flat, and sharper than anything my mother had said. "This is what happens when you raise a boy without a real man in the house." Jaime froze. I felt his hand tighten in mine. For half a second, the world tilted. Not with rage. Rage would have been easy. But with something colder. Something like grief. I didn't respond. I just looked my father dead in the eyes until he looked away. Then we walked out. No door slam. No last word. Just silence. Thick and final. In the car, Jamie didn't speak for a long time. Snow tapped against the windows like soft fingers. When I pulled into our driveway, he finally looked at me and said something I will never forget. "I don't think they know how to be sad for other people, Mama, only for themselves." I turned toward him slowly. His eyes were steady, older than they should have been. Later that night, he handed me a new drawing. A tall house with no lights on. A boy and his mother walking away on a snowy road. At the top, in his careful block letters, Some doors don't open the right way. I hung it on our fridge, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that my son saw the truth long before I could say it aloud. And that the door we closed behind us that day was not one I would ever try to open again. The weeks after that final visit passed in a kind of muted quiet, soft but heavy, like a snowfall that never quite melts. January slid into February without a single message, not a call, not a half-hearted checking in, not even one of my mother's carefully crafted guilt texts. It was as if we'd evaporated from their world. One day we were necessary, financially, emotionally, logistically, and the next day we were gone, erased like chalk from a board. At first, the silence felt surreal. I'd braced for another explosion, a long email about respect, a surprise visit full of theatrics, another accusation of being too sensitive, maybe even more police knocking on my door. Instead, I got nothing. And nothing, I realized, can sometimes feel louder than rage. But the house was peaceful. Jaime started sleeping deeply again, without curling into himself. He came home from school humming sometimes. He drew constantly, sketches of trees, snow, animals, tiny details from our cabin trip. His drawings felt warmer somehow, like each line was a place he wished we could live in forever. We didn't talk about my parents. We didn't need to. The absence said enough. But that ache in me, the bruise that had never fully faded, lingered. Not longing, not regret. More like the echo of something that used to be loud and constant, but had gone quiet without actually leaving. A shadow that hadn't figured out it no longer had a place to fall. Then, one night in early February, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Trish. Her voice was calm, composed, almost chipper, like the last month hadn't happened. She said she'd heard we were doing fine, whatever that meant. She said Caleb missed Jamie. She said maybe the kids could see each other for their sake. She said there was no reason to keep punishing everyone over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That was the word she chose for a child's cruelty, the adult's laughter, the police call, the letter telling me to apologize for my existence. I didn't finish the message. I deleted it and blocked the number. Because the truth was simple. Jaime didn't miss Caleb. He missed the idea of family. The soft version I'd promised him even when I should have known better. The one where everyone clapped for his drawings and asked about his day and made space for his small joys. The version he deserved. But the family he actually had? He didn't miss that at all. His art told me what he couldn't say. One evening, he came to me with another drawing. This one was a row of houses at night. Snow piled on the roofs. Every window was dark except one, ours, glowing gold from within. Why only our house with lights? I asked quietly. He shrugged a little, smiling softly. Because that's the one where it's warm. I taped it to the fridge, beneath the drawing about the door that wouldn't open the right way. A tiny gallery of truths we hadn't spoken fully yet, but both understood. Later that night, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the old Christmas photo. Matching sweaters, forced smiles, arms linked like we were a single, united front. I stared at it for a long moment, noticing things I hadn't seen before. The tension in my jaw, the way Jamie leaned into me, but not his grandparents. The stiffness in my father's shoulders, the overly bright smile on my mother's face. A performance, all of it. I didn't feel anger or grief, just clarity. I placed the photo back in the drawer face down. Not out of spite, just acceptance. Because here is what I now know, what I should have known long before the drawing ever hit the fire. I didn't lose a family. I lost a performance. A scripted version of love that depended on silence, on pretending, on shrinking parts of myself to fit roles I never agreed to play. A version where peace meant swallowing pain and kindness meant funding Christmas trips for people who laughed when my son cried. Real love doesn't look like that. Real family doesn't sound like that. Real love looks like standing by your child even when the entire room turns against him. It looks like dropping a plate on the floor to end the mockery. It looks like driving into the snow and finding a quiet cabin where the world finally makes sense. It looks like two drawings taped to a fridge. One about doors that stay closed, and one about the house that stays warm. Our home is small, quiet, imperfect, but it is real. And for the first time in my life, that is enough. Whatever happens next, whether they change, whether they don't, it won't change the one thing that matters. The door we closed behind us is staying closed, and the light inside our house is staying on.